What does dog sledding, Disney's Animal Kingdom, and horse racing all have in common? In this special edition of Extraordinary Vets, we explore the careers of 3 veterinarians as they share with us their pathway to a dean appointment. Welcome to Extraordinary Vets. I'm your host, Donna Harris. I'm a veterinarian at Michigan State University's College of Veterinary Medicine and a futurist. To understand the future, we need to look at who is shaping the profession today. Our first guest is Dr. Heidi Banse. You are leading a brand new veterinary school. You don't even have any students yet.
Correct. Yep. Just getting started.
All right. So Arkansas State University is in Jonesboro, Arkansas. I've got that right. And you, according to what I read, you'll be welcoming your new class or your first class in spring of 2026, you're hoping?
No, we're planning for fall 2026. So we're still working through accreditation. Our site team actually comes January, the first week of January. And then pending the outcome of that, are anticipating our first cohort for fall 2026, but that's still pending that outcome.
And how many students you expect in your first cohort?
We are planning for 120 students, with around half of those being Arkansans in-state students, and then half of those being out of state.
So you're not starting small.
We're not planning on it, and we recognize with the timeline, if we need to adjust that, we will, but that's our anticipated cohort size.
And how long have you been in this position as a dean of this new school?
So I've been here now a year and a half at Arkansas State.
Let's do a rewind, because our focus here, of course, is on your career and how you wandered your way into this deanship. I saw you went to veterinary school at Washington State, but you grew up in Montana. So tell me about that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Montana, as you mentioned, and in Montana at that time we were part of the WICHE program, the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. And so I could get in-state tuition rates at a handful of schools by being a Montana-sponsored student, and Washington State was one of those options. And so that's what led me to Washington State. Plus, my family actually had connections there. My dad had been a professor or assistant professor at Washington State University a long time ago, and so had a little bit of familiarity with that area, which led me there.
So here you are, a veterinary student at Washington State. What did you think you were going to do with your degree?
So I set out to be a mixed animal practitioner in rural Montana. That was my career goal when I started into veterinary school. So clearly have changed pathways quite a bit since that time.
Yeah, but you did do some practice, did you not? Or did you go straight into your internship?
No, I went straight into my internship.
Okay.
I've been in academia the whole time since vet school.
But an internship is some practice. I mean, you did clinical medicine. You went to Georgia, right? University of Georgia in Athens for your internship?
Yep. So yeah, went to University of Georgia for my internship, and that was a large animal internship, and then Oklahoma State University for my residency and PhD program. So, and really all the way up until about 2020, I did spend a bit of my time in clinical practice, either as a house officer, we would call that when you're doing an internship and residency program at an institution, or then as a faculty member.
So one thing I thought was really interesting, because I'd never heard of this, was that you had done your internship in large animal, but transitioned to an equine residency. So is that a common pathway, or is that unusual?
Yeah, so that is probably not too unusual. And I think at Georgia, they defined large animal as inclusive of horses. So there are some
Okay.
institutions that large animal is, food animal or production animal, or however you want to frame that in. And in
Mhm.
some institutions, they call things large animal that also includes horses. So my internship was actually probably about 85% horses. I did see some goats and cattle, sheep, those sorts of things, but mostly horses was my internship. So it was kind of a natural progression for me.
So were you a horse person coming into vet school?
Ah, I was not a horse person coming into vet school. I actually grew up with sled dogs. One of the things that I think helped influence my career path is that growing up with sled dogs gave me a great appreciation for the athleticism of animals. And I was really fascinated by the working animals. And I think when I went to vet school, it actually, because I grew up with hunting dogs too. And so we had pets, but they also had jobs. And so when I went to vet school, I realized that, most small animals didn't have jobs, but most large animals had jobs or other purposes. And so that was one of the things that transitioned me towards horses, is that appreciation for the work that they do and the purpose that they have in life.
I think that's really interesting because some students come into veterinary school in a set pathway and aren't sure that they can transition to something else that piques their interest. So you're a great example that you could. Now I have to jump back to this sled dog experience. Have you ever been up to the Iditarod or
You
worked
know,
that?
I have. In fact, I ran the junior Iditarod when I was in high school. So back in
Wow.
1999, I was still in Montana at that time. So we traveled. My mom drove with me to Alaska, and I ran the junior Iditarod. And then my husband actually ran the Iditarod in 2000. So we had some very close ties to the
Wow.
Iditarod early on, and got that whole experience.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think all those experiences make you a good vet. I know that some people that rise to the deanship spend their whole life or the majority of their life in one academic institution. You popped around to a couple different places and different roles. So, what do you think of those two pathways?
I think that there are definitely, as you mentioned, I mean, opportunities either way. There are people that tend to stay in one institution or maybe two throughout their career, and they're, very stable and get promoted and keep moving in that direction without moving geographically. I think for me, and specifically, I think in a startup school, the experience that I've been able to gather from a number of programs have helped me compare and contrast how we want to build this program and what we want it to look like. And I think without those experiences across a variety of institutions, it would be harder for me to feel comfortable in feeling like we've got the best path forward for our program for Arkansas. Particularly for me, I think one of the things that's been really helpful, because we're starting up what's called a distributed model, or what we like to call a community center model of clinical education, where our students go out into practices in the community for many of their fourth year rotations. And my early career at Calgary, they were one of the early adopters of that model. And so having those experiences and working in community clinics when I was a faculty member at Calgary, and seeing how those students got trained and seeing how they interacted with those practices has been hugely valuable as we start to build that program. And just seeing different educational systems, different approaches to assessment, all of those things have been really helpful, again, in this startup environment. And I think that's the difference. I think if you know get promoted through and you're familiar with the process and you're managing a program that's well established, then I don't know that that diversity of experiences is quite as important as what I feel like it is for a startup program. So I'm very grateful for the journey that my career has taken me on, because I think it's prepared me very well for this role. Not to say I'm always perfectly prepared, but in general, drawing on a diversity of experiences has been very helpful.
I can see where that is particularly helpful in a new startup because you're drawing, like you said, you're drawing all the good from different programs and avoiding some of the challenges that you lived through on those other programs. I love that. So as a distributive model for your students during their fourth year to go out and get their clinical experience, you have to recruit veterinarians that go to farms. What's that process look like? How are you still working on that?
We are still working on that, and that is a dynamic process. I think we have been very fortunate. Early on, we hired on an experienced clinical programs administrator, John Wheel, who led the program at Lincoln Memorial University when they
Mhm.
first got started. And so he did an amazing job for us recruiting practices and getting the ball rolling, helping people understand what it was like to be a clinical partner for us and train our students. And so that was really important early on, because I will say the distributed model is still fairly new for a lot of people. And so there sometimes is a little bit of uncertainty from veterinarians about what are we truly training? Why are we doing this model? So there's a good amount of just education of the practitioners that needs to happen to make sure they're comfortable with what we're doing. And ultimately, our goal is day one ready practitioners that are ready to go back to their practices and serve their communities with the people that are clinical partners. And so I think that educating to what our outcome is and how they can help us create that outcome that will then go to help serve them in their communities was really what allowed us to be successful in our recruitment. And then John Wheel departed from us this August, but Wynn DeGrassi is his replacement. She comes to us with 20 years of private practice experience in Virginia. And it was actually a great transition. John is a small animal veterinarian historically, and she's an equine veterinarian. And so her connections with the community and her understanding of what an equine practice looks like, because she owned one for 20 years, has been really valuable, and also helping get people on board, understanding what our educational program is about, getting additional large animal practices. And I will say we've been very fortunate to have good buy-in from practices across the state and southern Missouri. And a lot of that just comes from the fact that they recognize they need help. We are an underserved state from a veterinary standpoint. We have 10 counties right now that don't have a single veterinarian. And so their support helps us move forward quicker and get those graduates to them and get them prepared graduates. And so it's been a process, but I think overall there's been very good reception from the community as they've understood what we're trying to achieve and how they can be part of that.
I noticed that one of the things you were involved at, I don't know which school you were at, but you got involved with AAVMC, which is Association of American Veterinary Medical Colleges. So the group that I'm not going to say they control, because they don't control the colleges, but they give an opportunity. That AVMC gives the opportunity for colleges to come together and share ideas and make a difference. And they have a new initiative, relatively new, called Spectrum of Care. And you were involved in that. So how did you get involved in that? And are you bringing it to Arkansas? I bet.
Yeah, so the Spectrum of Care initiative was as you mentioned, launched by AAVMC several years ago, I think maybe 2021. And that initiative is really focused on making sure that we are educationally preparing our students to work in general practice and work in environments where resources may be limited in a variety of ways, and taking into account client, patient, and practice and veterinarian factors when you're developing a patient care plan, and making sure all of those factors are accounted for, and moving a little bit away from the historical gold standard that I think when I went through vet school, that was a very common thing to be taught. And unfortunately, sometimes what that gold standard training or teaching, that philosophy leads to, is sometimes when you're in practice and you don't have all the options available, sometimes people say, oh well, it's gold standard, or it's nothing, when really there's multiple treatment options that may still give that patient a good quality of life, may give the owner the outcome that they're looking for, that may not require all the high-tech equipment and all the expense associated with that. And so it's important, I think, especially to me, in some of our more traditional teaching hospitals where students are seeing a lot of referral cases and don't always see that general practice, making sure in their training we're incorporating some of those other options that they may not see, that's at that kind of at that far end of the spectrum in referral care. And so that's the premise of Spectrum of Care. I got involved in that because of when I was at LSU, I was very involved in their educational programs, and that was part of my promotional pathway. I started out as an assistant professor of equine medicine, but then moved in as a director of education, and then became associate dean for educational strategy towards the end of my time there, implementing a new curriculum. And so education was my passion, and was able to get involved in a variety of organizations, of committees and organizations in AAVMC, including the Council on Outcomes-Based Veterinary Education, and was able to leverage that expertise and contribute to developing some of the programs that the spectrum of care is trying to emphasize in the new curricula. And so that kind of educational passion of mine and experiences that I had was what helped, you know, develop me for that opportunity that spectrum of care provided.
I think that's great. I think your distributive model that you're going to have there in Arkansas is going to be perfect to continue the work that you've done in spectrum of care. I love all your experiences. You know, when you think about 10 and 20 years from now, your expertise is obviously academia. What do you think that the challenges are in our profession in the next 10 years?
I think I would say two things. Yeah, I think making sure that we're creating positions that are attractive to people and we're flexible and nimble and again, what defining what faculty are so we can continue to recruit and fill our ranks across institutions. I think that's important. And then the other thing I think from a challenge perspective is making sure that we are being very thoughtful in how we are integrating artificial intelligence, both into our workflow and also into how we're training students to prepare them for the workforce. Because I think, there's lots of opportunities there to streamline some of our menial tasks and some of those things that always take up time that maybe don't need to take up time, but making sure that we're not using it as a crutch and forgetting how to clinical reason. And so making sure that balance is present and we're using it in the right ways to advance ourselves and not try to replace the important things that make us clinicians and educators.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Banse. Congratulations on your relatively new position as a dean, and good luck in the future admitting your first class coming up here. And if anybody is listening that is interested in veterinary school in Arkansas State, where should they watch for an admissions process?
Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much for that question. So, we have our website, and we actually just launched a new website. Our institution did a couple of weeks ago. So, on that website, we'll show timelines and we will keep that updated as we progress. We also have a program email there that they're welcome to reach out to at any time with questions. We get about 5 to 7 queries a week right now, and we're trying to respond to those in a quick fashion. So, welcome any questions that people might have that way as well.
Great. Well, Arkansas has a great leader in their new veterinary school. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Our next guest on this special Dean's edition is Dr. Brendan Lee. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us about your career journey.
Hi, Dr. Harris. Welcome. I'm quite honored that you invited me.
Well, we have some really interesting aspects of your career to talk about. But first of all, you're the executive dean at St. Matthew's University, which has a veterinary school in Grand Cayman. And we're excited to dive into your career path. But first, your title of executive dean is different than we see at other veterinary colleges. So tell us what that means and what maybe your role is different from a traditional college or a CVM dean.
Well, it's one of those, I guess, unique titles based on our model of school. On our campus here in Cayman Islands, we have two schools, a medical school and a veterinary school. So as a result of that, we end up sharing a number of resources. So the main difference between my role and I guess a traditional dean is that I sort of oversee a lot of our cross resources that we use. So that's the additional part of the job.
So you manage a little bit of the medical school as well as the veterinary school.
Well, a little bit of the physical resources would be a better way to put it.
Okay. All right. Does the medical school also have a dean and the veterinary school has a dean and then you're the executive dean?
Yes, they're separate positions.
All right. Well, I'm sure I'll have questions about that, but let's go back a little bit. When did you first decide to go to veterinary school? Did you grow up surrounded by animals, or what kind of exposure did you have that brought you into the profession?
So, yes, I did grow up with animals, but that wasn't really my major impetus. One of the days I was watching horse racing, I still remember, and one of the horses broke its leg. And then the announcer said that unfortunately they had to put the horse down. So as I was a little kid, I must have been 8 or 9 years old at the time, and I wondered why did they have to put the horse down just because it broke its leg. When humans break their legs, they don't put them down. So therefore, I thought I would go to school and figure out a way to save horses. That was the impetus then.
Well, that's great. 8 years old.
Yeah.
I can imagine that. So when you started your veterinary degree, first of all, where'd you go for veterinary school? And was your original plan, I can't imagine it was to go into academia, but maybe it was. What do you think your original plan was going to be?
It really wasn't because, again, as a young kid growing up, I kind of wanted to do veterinary medicine, but I also wanted to do a PhD in zoology for some reason. I kind of wanted to work in a zoo. That didn't quite pan out. But I went to the University of the West Indies, and whilst I was there, I really did want to do theriogenology. That was really my love, you know. But back then, I wanted a program that encompassed all species. And my initial research, I only found, bovine reproduction or equine therio. I didn't find something a program that I was happy with that did everything. So upon graduation, I went back home to St. Lucia and I practiced for about 7 years in a mainly small animal practice with a smattering, did a little bit of poultry here, a little bit of, I guess, pigs every so often, that sort of thing.
But that sounds like that was good experience, though. It seems like the profession is focused so much on clinical medicine. It seems like it's nice that you had some practice experience.
Yes, no, for sure. I did enjoy being in clinical practice. It's one thing to go through school and learn all the theory and you have some guided practical experience, but then you get thrown in the deep end. I mean, when I graduated, I think we finished in May, and then I started working in August. And as soon as I walked through the door, the veterinarian told me I'm going on vacation.
Oh no.
So I kid you not. So within, a week, I guess, of working there, I was on my own. It was a one vet
Wow.
practice at the time. So I came in as a second veterinarian. So within a week, I was on my own.
Sink or swim.
Sink or swim.
Yeah, that's right. So you spent some time in clinical practice, eventually went on to get a master's of public health, and a PhD, which is more research oriented. That's a lot of degrees. Where did you earn those degrees?
So actually, after maybe about 2 years of being in practice, it sort of became a little bit monotonous. It's one of those things I guess almost every grad goes through at some point. You do the same things over and over. You do your spay and neuters, and you can do them automatically without even thinking. So I started wondering, what next? What next? And I sort of weighed my options between production medicine, going on to do some graduate work in production medicine, or public health. And I can tell you, whilst I was at school, I never liked public health at all. It really was. It was probably one of the subjects I liked the least. But for some reason, that spoke to me a little bit more at the time. And my initial graduate degree was in veterinary public health and epidemiology from the University of London. And I was able to actually do that as sort of a distance program. This is back in 2005, I think, somewhere back there. So that was my first introduction to public health and epidemiology. And I really did love, especially the public health aspect of it. I really did love that. At that time, it didn't really open that many doors for me. So I continued to search and look for other programs. And I came across the veterinary public health residency program at the University of Minnesota. So I applied for that, and I was successful to join that program, which then allowed me to do human public health. So I have a master's in veterinary public health and a master's in human public health. So it was really cool to go through that and be able to juxtapose the differences and the nuances between the two aspects of public health. There's a lot more overlap and intersection than people sometimes may think. So I guess I sort of was at the cusp of One Health before One Health was really, a big thing at that time. So I continued on, and I worked through a number of different companies, and eventually I ended up here at St. Matthew's University. And whilst I was here, I continually quest for new knowledge, if you will. So at that point, I tried to figure out what would be the next step. And I figured, okay, a PhD would be my sort of only other option, really, in terms of onward development. And I remember a supervisor of mine always suggested that it was important to get a PhD. And he was quite candid, quite blunt about it. He said, like, it really doesn't matter what you get a PhD in, but get the PhD. As a terminal degree, it sort of
Wow.
removes that glass ceiling for you. So, because at the end of the day, what it teaches is, or it shows you, is that the person who has the PhD understands how to find new knowledge and is able to function by themselves as well as a team to create that new knowledge. So, following his advice, I searched and eventually, not wanting to go back to school full time, giving up my day job, if you will, I was able to get into the Walden program. And it was actually quite an intense program, doing it at distance. You still had to travel in between to go to various in-person sessions, but doing the majority of it at distance. And I still was able to do it in a 4-year period. So without having to extend too long. So yes, it took a lot of long hours, but I was successful in doing that. So that's sort of the genesis of the degrees.
So let's look at your role that you're in today. You're in this executive dean role. What are some of the best things about it? What do you like about it? What are some of your challenges?
Well, the beauty of it is being at a smaller institution allows you to have a lot more direct impact in changes, as well as I still have the opportunity to lecture. So I still engage with my students, which is really one of the key points to me, because otherwise I think, if you become just a traditional dean and you step away from the teaching role, it sort of sometimes separates you from the student experience, which I think is really one of the key things, that you are sympathetic and empathetic and understanding to what the students are going through, not just managing from a distance. So it does allow me to do that, and at the same time I still have the responsibilities of upper management and overseeing the general program.
So you developed your job pathway, your career pathway up to your executive dean position by starting in clinical practice and going back and getting some of the advanced degrees.
Yes.
There's obviously lots of different pathways. What advice might you have for somebody who is looking at academia and maybe thinking, well, I'd like to earn up to a deanship position?
Yeah. So I think the key thing is never say no to an opportunity if you don't think that you are ready or qualified for it. Right? The fact that the opportunity presents itself means that even though you may not think so, you definitely have that, je ne sais quoi, maybe sometimes, that attracts persons to you for that position. So, I mean, my pathway here is honestly divine, simply because I never liked public health, as I said. I went to Minnesota, and one of the days at a conference, my supervisor happened to introduce me to the dean at the time at St. Matthew's University. And he asked me if I was interested in lecturing and coming down to the school. And at that time, it really wasn't on my radar. And I went off, and as I said, I did other jobs and positions. And I was at a stage in the job I was in at the time, and I wanted to change. And I decided at the end of my contract I wouldn't renew it, and I'd figure something else out. And I didn't have a plan, honestly, at that point. And out of nowhere, I got an email from the same dean that I had met at the conference saying, there's an open position, why don't you apply? I said, okay, why not? So I applied and I got the job. And then I'm always the person who is willing to help others as well. So I often got pushed into positions of what others may seem as authority, but I see as help. So, you are the chair of a department. It doesn't mean that you sort of rule the department. It means then that you're in a position to help others achieve their goals as well as their mandates. So I sort of continued to get put in front of more and more responsibility, just from the point of view of being willing to undertake whatever was asked of me at the time. So it's really about exploring opportunities, being willing to be put in an uncomfortable position that you may not be familiar with the responsibilities, or you may not think that you have the necessary skill set, and being willing to grow into the position as well. But the key thing, I think, at the end of the day, is always working with others and for others.
Yeah, it sounds great advice. A unique perspective from your vantage point. So the last question I always like to ask our guests is, you're certainly in a position to see the profession from, a different perspective, not only from Grand Cayman and St. Matthews, but also because you've been out and about talking to a lot of people. So what do you think our biggest challenges are over the next 10 years in the profession?
Well, from an educational standpoint, we do know that we are behind the curve in producing veterinarians. I think the other challenge is going to be dealing with the burnout, I think, that many of the younger veterinarians are experiencing. So at one point, it was difficult to find a position, find a job. So you sort of took the job and you had to work your way through. But now there's such demand for veterinarians. Students coming out of school often have the pick of the litter as to where they want to work. But often they tend to go for the ones that generate the most money, but those tend often to also be very intense positions. So you find that after a year or two, working extremely long shifts, many hours, many days in the week, they feel that burnout coming upon them. And then we see now more and more want to move into relief positions. So that in itself, in a way, is going to create an additional shortage. So we sort of go around in a cycle. Though we create and we try to create more and more opportunities for more persons to become veterinarians, we still do end up with a shortage, especially in the key high demand areas. So I think dealing with that workforce shortage is going to be one of the big challenges. Of course, everyone focuses on AI as well. It's the new technology. My view on that is embrace technology as with everything. See how we can make it work for us. It's still a little bit nascent in the veterinary world. The diagnostic imaging and pathology guys have a lot more opportunities, I guess, right now to apply it. But gradually, I think it's going to become sort of everyday technology. Same way that we use a cell phone every day, I think very soon everyone is going to be using AI, whether they know it or not, in every day. So it's left to us to figure out what's the best way that we can apply it to the various aspects of veterinary medicine. And every field of veterinary medicine is different, but we can use that technology for sure.
So when I first asked you about the challenges, you started out by saying that academia was a little bit behind. I want to clarify, behind in the numbers of veterinarians producing, or behind in their education level?
Well, not necessarily education level. Yes, definitely in terms of the numbers, we do need to produce more veterinarians. But also, I think in ensuring that we have well-rounded, nimble students who can adjust to the various challenges that they face, whether it is on the clinical level or also just in a holistic sense. Because a veterinarian, a successful veterinarian, is a well-rounded person. It's not just about the profession; it's about what do you do in your personal life to give you that balance, so you don't face the burnout that seems to be so common in especially the younger veterinarians.
We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us on this special edition of Extraordinary Vets. Enjoy your weather down in the Cayman Islands, and please pass all that good weather up here north to Michigan.
Yes, try to stay warm.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. Have a good one.
Our last guest has walked a road that runs from wildlife to the beginnings of Disney's Animal Kingdom. He's currently the Dean of the UC Davis College of Veterinary Medicine. Please welcome Dr. Mark Stetter.
Donna, excited to meet you, and thanks for hosting me.
We always like to start at the beginning. So tell us, did you grow up with animals? Do you remember when you decided you were going to head toward veterinary medicine as a career?
I'm one of those kids generationally that was reading All Creatures Great and Small. Influenced by that, was also watching The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau. So I was often torn in my early days about wanting to be a marine biologist and wanting to be a veterinarian, and tried to combine the two. And so when I went off to vet school, I was also applying to marine biology programs. And I really thought when I got out of vet school, I would be a marine mammal vet or an aquatic vet and working either in an aquarium or with free-ranging aquatic critters. Did time at Marineland and SeaWorld and zoos during vet school, and it only reinforced that I wanted to work with non-domestic species, but I kind of was drawn more to the zoo space only because when you work with aquatics, at least that time, this was a long time ago, you couldn't touch the animals as much as I wanted to touch the animals. I wanted to be able to, listen to their hearts and fix them as far as blood samples and surgery and diagnostics. And at that point, there was a lot of observing animals in tanks, looking at, how much they weighed, how much they ate, looking at water quality samples. So I kind of switched to zoo and wildlife medicine, which was wonderful. And I got to do a lot of aquatics along the way, but not as restricted as just the marine biology thing.
So where'd you go to veterinary school?
So I'm an 88 grad from the University of Illinois, grew up in the Chicago space. And so as we talk in December and you're in Michigan, I can imagine what your winter might be like. Spent 8 years in Champaign-Urbana, doing both my undergraduate and veterinary degree. During that time, as I said, I was really more and more interested in zoo and wildlife. So I did an internship afterwards up at the Animal Medical Center in New York, really with the idea of if I was going to be a good clinician with exotic wildlife, I needed to be able to really hone my skills on domestics. So if I'm going to treat renal disease in a lion, I need to know how to do that with a cat. And if I'm going to do surgery on a rhino, I need to be able to feel confident in dogs. And so internship was great. And then I did a residency in zoo and wildlife medicine up at the Bronx Zoo and Wildlife Conservation Society in New York City. Had a wonderful time up there, stayed for several years after my residency. And then they were opening the Animal Kingdom theme park down in Orlando at Walt Disney World, recruiting a bunch of zoo people from across the nation. And I was able to be part of the opening team for the Animal Kingdom at Walt Disney World back in, I guess it was 97-ish.
So when you did your internship, you did it in a rotating small animal internship. Nowadays, I don't know about when you and I were older and did it, but now there are zoo internships. But you felt, at least to launch yourself into the zoo career path, that you felt the rotating small animal was a good start, huh?
It was wonderful just because the caseload there was, incredible. Got to see so many different things, and with the mentorship of all the different specialties in small animal practice. Now, I know many people that have gone into wildlife medicine that have done large animal rotations and learned about, all the hoof problems in cattle or horses that I never learned about. And that's really important if you're working on giraffes or elephants. So each one has its pros and cons, but for my journey, the small animal route was great. I also met my wonderful wife, Kelly, who is a veterinary technician. She was doing a vet tech internship at the Animal Medical Center. We both lived through that crazy year, and then I ended up getting hitched after that.
Well, that makes it all worth it. A year in New York City to meet your spouse is a positive, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. So you went through veterinary school thinking about zoo medicine or marine in that direction. So anything about that experience that you brought to academia? Because you first went to the animal kingdom. Were you in clinical medicine there, or were you in administrative there?
So I was at Disney World for about 15 years. Started as a clinician, bringing in all the animals for the animal kingdom, and spent a lot of time getting them acclimated to their new exhibits. We brought in thousands of animals from all over the world, which was a phenomenal experience just as far as a Disney culture and what does it take to open a theme park and what does it take to do that with gorillas and rhinos and birds and reptiles and fish. So that both clinically and from an experience was wonderful. And then through the 15 years at Disney World, I kind of went up the food chain and left as the director of animal operations. So was an executive with the company and got much more involved with opening new areas, with service as it relates to the guest experience when people would come visit us. What does it mean from a conservation perspective? So a little bit less about the day-to-day veterinary care and a lot more about what are zoos and aquariums doing to help conserve wildlife all over the world, and what is our messaging and responsibility from a having animals in a captive situation, but educating the public and getting them excited about going out and saving wildlife wherever they live. And so that was a huge part of my job towards the end there, and I loved it because it was much. It was challenging, and it was much different than the traditional veterinary medicine, looking at blood work and managing a case. It was looking at millions of people that come visit a theme park and how we could influence families and thinking about maintaining the environment that we live in and helping the wildlife that live there and being conservation heroes after they left the park.
All right, so you were there for 15 years, kind of like you said, worked your way up the food chain. But for many people, that would have been the dream job. But oh no, not you. You take a jump to Colorado. You were the dean at Colorado State's College of Veterinary Medicine. So what was the thought process like for you to say, okay, we're going to leave this job and head to academia?
Donna, that's a great question, and one that I've been asked, I don't know how many hundreds of times. Like, you were a Mickey Mouse vet down at Walt Disney World, and why did you leave?
I'm not sure I'd call you a Mickey Mouse vet, but go.
I'll call myself that. Anyway, it was a phenomenal experience, and as I mentioned, learned so much in addition to veterinary medicine about managing hundreds and hundreds of people, managing multi-million-dollar budget, managing a variety of different priorities. But after 15 years in Orlando, I love Florida, but I don't know if I love the city of Orlando, kind of landlocked, a lot of tourism. And the kids were getting to a point that they were big enough and we were looking at new opportunities. I also was feeling increasingly like I wasn't connected to veterinary medicine as much as I had thought, right? So as I moved up the food chain, became very involved with Disney World and messaging from conservation and building new things. We were building the Animal Kingdom Lodge, which was phenomenal. And we were thinking about our guest experience, and we were thinking about what is Disney's responsibility with the next animal movies, right? So we had done Lion King and we had done Finding Nemo. And I was more and more involved with the next Finding Nemo should make sure that there's no place where an animal gets flushed in a toilet thinking that it's going to be released to the wild, right? So there was a growing need for animal experts to be involved with all things animal for Disney, not just the theme parks. And we were rising to that occasion, which was appropriate, so we could review scripts and be involved. At the same time, it wasn't close to veterinary medicine. And so I had worked with the equine surgeon at Colorado State for years. We had done elephant work in Africa. Part of our project was to look at how to help with some of the population management in Southern Africa. And he called me one day and said, "Hey, the dean job is opening at Colorado. Would you be interested?" And I kind of laughed him off saying, never been a professor, never been a department head, never worked at a university. They have me lecture every once in a while at places, but this isn't going to work for them or for me. And he said, well, just, you manage 500 people and you have some experience and you certainly have published and done things. So it's not out of the question. So sent them a CV and they said, we'd like for you to formally apply. And they took a crazy gamble on a Mickey Mouse vet, as we said, Donna, and ended up, really enjoying my time there. So typically vets get I should say deans get a 5-year agreement contract. I did the first 5 years and they thought it was working out okay, so ended up staying 10 and really enjoyed my time in academia and felt like I was making a difference with the faculty, staff, students, alumni, all the many people that want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And then here at Davis, I had finished my 10 years at Colorado and they were looking for a new leader. Had a couple colleagues that gave me a call and I had kind of said, I think I'm looking more towards retirement than starting a brand new gig. But they twisted my arm and here we are and things have been great.
I think your message there when you talked about your transferable skills, we get a lot of young veterinarians or mid-career that for some reason, wherever they are, isn't working out or they want something different and they're not sure that their skills are transferable. So you're a great example of taking your skills and understanding that they are transferables. I think we're certainly educated in a lot of ways that make us qualified to do a lot of jobs we don't think about.
And to your point, Donna, I mean, a lot of what I think they were looking for was somebody with problem solving skills, which veterinarians have, and I was able to certainly do when I was at Disney. People management, HR, budget, project management as far as large scale and prioritization and strategic planning. All of those things are things that a dean spent a fair amount of time with and that I had done at Disney. Even if I hadn't, run a large research program, even if I hadn't applied for NIH R01 research, I was quite clear when I applied for the position that if you're looking for a DVM, PhD, world-renowned research scientist, I am not your guy. I don't have that in my portfolio. If you're looking for somebody who's managed large groups, who have helped put together transformational projects that people are excited about, then maybe we should talk, that type of thing.
I forgot to ask you, how big is your class size at UC Davis?
So we've just bumped it up a little bit. We're at 155 students per class.
Okay, so pretty big vet school. So share with our listeners who are thinking about, gosh, maybe I could work my way up to a dean. What challenges you, but what rewards you?
Sure. At first, I'd say there's a huge need, and you know this, Donna, for leaders within higher education, right? And anybody who's interested in that, and I've been able to mentor and support a variety of young faculty and veterinarians who say, I'd really like to grow in my leadership skills, or I'd like to take on additional responsibility. Some people do that in the research space. Some people do that in managing teams, fundraising, whatever that is. It's been really exciting to see the number of people who are thinking about that and then dip their toe in the water and like it and want to do more and more and more. From a challenges perspective, I don't need to tell you that all of higher education is, under a variety of pressures. Even before the current administration, state budgets have reduced the amount of funding that they typically are giving to our state schools. And so we are trying to figure out ways to support all the great things we do without putting the economic burden on our students. And yet we don't have the funding that we used to have. A million years ago when I went to vet school, Donna, I think it was $800 a year at the University of Illinois for tuition, right? And our school is one of the much, much, much more reasonable schools as far as veterinary schools. So we're in the 30s as far as how much it costs to come to school here. But as you know, there's plenty of schools across the world that are 70,000 plus. And so how do we make sure that our students are not leaving with incredible debt load, but getting a phenomenal education that allow them to do anything they want? And that's, I think, our biggest challenge for us. What we're doing is looking at new ways to fund things that we've never done before. And a lot of that is through philanthropy. We're starting a whole series of new buildings that are going to allow us to increase our class size from 155 to 200, to build a new primary care hospital that our students want more of. Society needs more primary care, access to veterinary care, shelter medicine, community practice, whatever that is. We're building a whole new hospital that just does that. And then we're looking at a brand new specialty, small animal specialty hospital for teaching more residents and more students. And all of those are really being funded through philanthropy. And we wouldn't have thought of that 20, 30 years ago. We would have said, we're going to go to the state and we're going to hope and plead and wait until they say yes. And we just don't feel we can do that. So our pivot has been around gaining additional support and success from our grateful clients, from our alumni, from foundations, from industry partners that allow us to keep growing and being successful and not have to live in the previous paradigm. So I guess when people would say, is it fun? It depends how you define fun. There's plenty of challenges. We're doing great things. It's very satisfying. But there's plenty of times that you kind of go, you know, we've got another multi-million-dollar budget cut year after year after year. And yet our faculty, who are phenomenal, are getting offered positions in the private sector for twice what they're getting paid here. How do we keep the best faculty that we have to teach the best students? Those are the kind of things that sometimes keep me up at night, and sometimes we celebrate because we're able to make some steps forward.
Yeah, that sounds really tough. It does sound like, at least in the position that you're in right now at this particular school, that your communication skills in expressing this mission and getting people to buy into this mission is a real skill set. That sounds like something that people that want to stay in academia and rise up and work their way up need to have those strong skills, sounds like.
Well, yes, but I would say what we as a profession need to constantly do, and it's certainly not unique to Davis or myself, but how do we tell the great stories that veterinary medicine has, right? I mean, I just met with the senator's office earlier today, and they have dogs and cats, and they knew about that. But when I talked to them about the work that we're doing with avian flu in dairies across the state of California, or how we're keeping our food safe through our testing labs, or the amount of research that we do to help people, when I talk to them about the fact that, new cancer medications, new heart medications, new therapies are coming out all the time, and they come out faster when they work with veterinary schools because we're able to leapfrog a lot of the bureaucracies that are out there regarding testing. And so I think a big part of what I enjoy, but is also something that we as a profession can and should do more of, is how do we tell our stories to the general public in a way that ensures that they appreciate the value we provide to society, to biomedical research, to food safety and security. And yes, they understand that we take care of their dog and their cat when those needs are there, but do they understand the other things that we do that are hugely beneficial that might not be in front of them every day?
As a futurist, I think about things like that a lot, and I'm wondering what you think when you think 10 and 20 years out, right? Just leap right over the next 10 years. What do you think our biggest challenges in the profession, or specifically in academia, either one? What do you think our biggest challenges are going to be?
Wow. You're the futurist. I'm just the day-to-day, keep the wheels on the kind of guy, Donna. So
Futurists are not predictors. We ask smart people the right questions, hopefully, but we do have some big challenges, as every profession does. So is it maintaining a student body? Is it maintaining faculty? Is it getting, like you said, communicating to the public, changes in technology? Just, I don't know. What do you think?
I think we have and will continue to follow the human health space as it relates to major advances, right? So you can think of biomedical research. You can think of, we're learning more and more about how AI is driving both advances in teaching and advances in research. I have a feeling that is going to be a big piece, and understanding how to use it for good versus evil is a conversation I'm having on a daily basis now. What I would say is, for me, makes me really optimistic about the future is, never before have the people of both the United States and around the world fully understood the human-animal bond as much as they do. And never before has our food source been so important as we grow. And never before have people really understood the importance of the environment and nature. And so when I think about the big things that we contribute, biomedical research, food safety, security, keeping our environment safe for our planet, are some of 20 other things. We are not going away, and our value will continue to increase. Our challenge is that we don't have an economic model that supports us to the extent of big pharma, NIH research, and human health. So whether it be insurance, whether it be how medications are developed because of an economic driver for medication. We all know that there are plenty of diseases in animals that probably could be addressed in a more rapid fashion, but a company would say, hey, there's not enough money for me to develop this versus a human medication if it was the same situation because of the way things are paid out and such. So I think we will continue to not struggle from a societal need, but from the economic drivers that often slow us down because there's not as much interest in moving some of those things forward if they are specific to animals that don't either help with the ag economics or help with biomedical research that could go into the human health space. Does that make sense, Donna?
It does, but I've got to pick your brain on that a little bit because
Yep.
that is such a unique perspective that you bring up about the economic model not being shored up with the things you mentioned, the grants and disappearing grants. Yes. With the rise of the human animal bond, at least in small animal, could that help us with that economic model, or you don't think that's strong enough? What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly helping us if you look at oncology, right? What a great example of people spending a significant amount of money because of the human animal bond to treat their animals, and how some of the only approved FDA drugs for animals that are just for animals, not for people, are in the oncology space, right? And that is because animals get cancer a lot. We have therapies that will work, and people are willing to pay for that. If we moved some of that to other areas in veterinary medicine that might not have had a clinical trial that was going to support it because it's going to help humans too, there's less of that. So the examples I'm aware of that have really moved forward to help animals and people are often in oncology, a little bit of cardiology, orthopedics, that type of thing. But the ones that have moved quickly are often funded because it has a human health component. And I think we will continue to be left a little bit behind if it is something that is only an animal disease issue and not a human health issue, or we can't at least draw some level of a dotted line that learning about this fundamental science research piece helps human health in some way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark Stetter, Dean of the UC Davis Veterinary School. Nice to talk to you about your challenges, your rewards, your unique career pathway. Keep bringing out those veterinary students.
Thanks, Donna. Hey, I hope to meet you in person if our paths might cross. And thanks for giving me a little bit of time today. Your podcast is awesome. I look forward to seeing more.
Thank you for listening to this special Dean's edition of Extraordinary Vets. Our guest today showed us that there is no one pathway to becoming a dean, and they all bring their varied knowledge, experience, and leadership to their colleges to promote the future of veterinary medicine. Thank you again to Dr. Heidi Banse, Dr. Brendan Lee, and Dr. Mark Stetter. This is Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story.